Hey everyone, my name is Dave and welcome to the Speed Shop here at NTD Racing. We just got back from the Baja 1000. Didn't finish it. We ended up snapping some axles. In fact, we've snapped both of them on our 14 bolts. So let me go through a little bit about tell you how they broke in the race and then what we're gonna do to fix them. So during the race, we got to this point, we didn't realize how tough this one section was gonna be. We're kind of going up a hill, we make a turn around some trees, and there is a vehicle upside down right in the middle of the course. And it's going to take a while for them to clear him out. You know, time is everything when you're racing these things. And so we're going to try to find another way around this guy. And looks like we can go straight. Some people have tried it, and it's like twice as steep. And had I given myself a better run at it, we'd probably done a little bit better. We make a run at it going straight. We kind of go up the hill for a while. We dig in. And then we got to back out because we're kind of stuck there. We back out. We'd make a couple more runs at it. And at one point, the wheel kind of catches something and we hear like this really loud snap. We thought we actually hit somebody. As it turns out, it was our axle. And there's what one of the axles, this is what the one looks like. It kind of snapped, you can see there. Well, so that one broke, but we run in the back of our car what is called a spool. And what that means is that our axles, both of them are always connected. So we took the differential part out. We don't even have a locker in there. It's called a spool. So it is like basically having a solid shaft all the way across. And so we still had power on one of the wheels. And so we just said, you know, our chase team is about 20 miles down the road. Let's see if we can get there. So we make another run at this thing with just, you know, power on one wheel. And it's just too much to have, you know, we needed all the power we could get because it's a pretty steep hill. It's pretty treacherous. And after about one or two runs at it, we snapped the other axle, and now we're hurting pretty bad. So, you know, what's really kind of cool about the 14 bolt axle is just how easy it is to work in the field. So let's go ahead and take a look at the axle and all the failure modes and the reason I think it broke. And then I'm going to show you how we're going to use Yukon's cut to length axles to make new ones. And I'll show you why they're going to be a lot better for this application. All right, so this is the back side of our race truck Lefty, and in my last video, you saw we had a little bit of a bent axle tube, and I went ahead and welded some other tubes on there to straighten that thing out, so if you want to check out that video. But this is a 14 bolt axle, and the reason they call it a 14 bolt is because this cover right here has 14 bolts on it, as simple as that. This comes out of a Silverado 2500 HD, and it is called a full float axle. Now, what does that mean? So if you kind of take a look here on this side, this is where the axles are. So here's the new ones over here, but this one right here is the broken one. So what's going on here is you basically have the hub, which the wheel is connected to, and it's connected to the brakes back here, and that is all on its own bearing. And if you take out these bolts right here and slide the broken piece of axle out, the tire and the wheel stay on there, and it'll run all day long without that axle in there because the axle is not actually connected to the bearings. It's floating on these bearings, so it's only connected and it's transferring power to this hub and to the wheels. And then on the other side over here, basically that axle goes all the way down the axle tube. It goes into the housing and then into our spool or your differential or your locker. It doesn't actually ever touch a bearing. So the axle is floating in there. And so the differential is on bearings, and then at the end of the hubs over there, the wheel tire are also on their own bearings. The axle is not. And the benefit of that is that when you're out there racing or whatever, let's say you snap an axle, in theory, if you got an extra one, all you have to do is take all of these 8 bolts out, slide it out, slide the new one in, and then you're ready to go. You never had to take the tire off of the axle. Just a word of caution, something that we learned along the way is that this one right here is out of a 2013 Chevy Silverado. Our other truck, Honcho, has a 2010 Chevy Silverado's axle. And what we did not realize is that the axle, while the splines are the same and all those kinds of things, this bolt pattern is different. It's slightly bigger on the 13, it is smaller on the 10. I think that the year change swap over happens between 2010 and 2011. So just when you order those, and we got ours from Rock Auto, just make sure you get the right ones. And so just kind of taking a look at these axle shafts over here that we're gonna be cutting to length, this is what I'm talking about. Is again, here's that flange we're talking about. It's slightly larger on the 2013. Here are the shafts that we broke. You can kind of see maybe the failure mode there. It is actually a torsional failure. It might have been some fatigue in there. We were jumping this thing a whole bunch. But I think, you know, you can kind of narrow the failures down to why did this amazingly strong axle break? Well, we did a couple things. First, we went from whatever size was on the Silverado to 40-inch tires. So there's one much larger moment arm you're putting on the axle. Two, we put the spool in so that you can never disconnect the left and the right wheel. They were always turning the same speed. Even if you're in a turn, one wheel's got a skid. And then three, we put the tallest gears we could put in there. We put 5/38s. So there's another moment arm. So that axle is in between two things that are just creating massive amounts of moment. And it just snapped these other axles. So these axles right here are about 1.3 inches in diameter. And these new ones from Yukon are about 1.5 inches, slightly over that in diameter. And when I say cut to length, what I mean by that is if I slide the protector off, once I got that off, you can see there's a lot of splines. So what you do is we're going to measure it. We're going to cut this to the length that we need, and then we'll use that one in the truck. What's interesting about this one is that the length of the long one can cover both the long one and the short one. So in theory, if you just wanted to bring one, you could just basically have one. That's probably what we'll do, is probably we'll cut the one long one to the length of whatever the long one we would need as our spare, and then we will mark it in case we got to cut it in the field really quickly to our short axle, and that's how we'll use those for spares. One other thing that they do, the material strength. So the tensile strength of this is much lower than the tensile strength of this one. So, you know, you're probably talking at least twice as strong for these axles, considering the greater diameter. That's probably the biggest change. And then also the tensile strength of the material that we're using. So let's go ahead. First, we're going to pull those broken pieces out. I'll show you how we're going to measure them, and then we're going to go ahead and cut these things and get them back into the truck. So as you can see, I have this one long shaft, and the splines would cover either the short one or the splines would cover the long one. So in theory, you could just get one shaft and keep that as in your toolkit as an extra or something like that. But let's talk about how we're going to measure it. So the way that they recommend, I saw when I watched Yukon's videos, they say measure from the flange all the way down to the end, and then this is 40 1/4. Then come over here and we'll mark this one at 40 1/4. You know, I'm not going to get too crazy about measuring that. You can use that technique. I'm also going to use just laying the two next to each other since I have both shafts. And I'm going to have a little piece of angle aluminum. I use this stuff for everything. I get it from Home Depot. I'm going to line up with the end of the axle. I'm going to bring it over to the new shaft, which I'm about to cut, and then I'm going to mark a line as to where I want to cut. And you know what? I'm going to cut it just slightly long, because you can always cut stuff off, but you can't cut stuff on. So, and then if I just kind of measure it and use their technique, I get 34 3/4. And if I measure it out to the line I just made, that's 34 3/4. So either way, that's going to be good. So let's go ahead. I'm going to take this over to the bandsaw, and we're going to cut it just slightly long, hoping that it'll still fit in there like that, and then we won't have to go get a new one. All right, I've got the axle chucked up in what I think is one of the most valuable tools in my shop, this bandsaw. I have cut everything with this, and I've used the same blade for 2 trucks. I've never changed the blade, so I'm almost trying to see how long it will go, but you can kind of see in here, I got it chucked up. It's going to cut right through that line that I had on there. I've measured it like 20 times. I'm going to cut once, hopefully not to cut it too short. So I'm going to cut this thing nice and slow, and it should make a nice clean cut right through that spline. That was kind of crazy. I just went on and on about how this bandsaw is so amazing. It'll cut everything, but it didn't cut through this. I think that the hardness of the steel is just too great for it to cut through there. It went through a little bit, then it stopped. So I'm going to the angle grinder, which I'd never seen anything that stopped an angle grinder, so we'll see how this one does. What I did is I put a pipe clamp on there, and I'm going to use that to basically follow. I'm going to cut right up to the pipe clamp, hopefully to get, you know, pretty close. Again, this is going to be the end of the shaft. It really doesn't matter what that side looks like. It's really just what the splines look like. Let's go ahead and see if we can cut this thing off. All right, so we're ready to get the axle back in the housing. I cleaned both the mating surfaces with a little bit of acetone. I have a really light coat of RTV on both sides. We're gonna slide the axle in there. It takes a little wiggling to get it in there. You might have to move the wheel to line up the holes. And after that, these bolts, they get a 19 millimeter socket. They take 115 foot-pounds of torque. So first impression, everything seems better about these axles than the old ones. Check the comments. I'll be testing these things out. If we snap them or something like that, I'll be the first one to let you know. So where do you get these things? I'd love to send you to my Amazon store to get them, but I think Rock Auto was the best price for them. And also I got the right part number and all those things, so that worked on this truck for our application. However, there were a lot of tools that I used today, and if you're interested in any of those, there'll be a link in the description below, which will take you to our Amazon store. It'll cost you the exact same amount of money, but we get a couple bucks to use towards our truck. We do appreciate it. So I do have a whole bunch of videos on all things 14 bolt, whether it is making a truss, putting in new gears, putting in a spool, and all those kinds of things. I'll put some links in the description. One of the videos should show up right here. Hope to see you next week. Take care of yourself.